Help support Name Explain by liking this video, leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel. High school is a really strange time in your life. When you are there, it is all-consuming. Your whole life revolves around your fellow pupils, your teachers, and of course your studies. Yet when you leave high school/education entirely, you realize that the lifestyle structure education places on you is nothing like the structure of the real world, and all of a sudden school seems like a completely different life. Many people look back at high school as the best time in their life, while many look back at it as being a really unpleasant time. If you happen to be in high school while watching this video, I hope you are enjoying yourself, and if not, then just remember high school does come to an end, despite what Bowling for Soup may tell you. I of course grew up in the UK, and here we call high school secondary school. However, as US creator media is so popular here, the American idea of high school has really seeped into the consciousness of people in the UK and all across the globe. I was so fascinated by American high school culture from things like Napoleon Dynamite, American Vandal, and of course Bully/Canis Camet Edit as it is called here in the UK. Even shows that are set in the school system before and after high school, like Recess set in elementary school, or The Simpsons when Homer goes to college. It was through stuff like that I saw all those classic tropes of American high schools, like not having to wear a uniform, hall passes, rows of lockers, and most importantly, all the stereotypes of students. Honestly, I don't really know if these stereotypes still even exist anymore, or if they really existed in the first place. Maybe they were just easy concepts or works of fiction set in high schools latched onto. That's how a lot of stereotypes began anyway. Nevertheless, however, all these high school stereotypes are known across the globe, and some of these have broken out of being just used in high schools, and some of them date back to hundreds of years ago. When I say nerd or jock, I'm sure a certain image comes to mind for you. However, where did those names even come from? And before we really dig into this, I just want to reiterate that these stereotypes may primarily be a Western/US idea, so may not exist in your country. Though I'd love to know what school stereotypes do exist where you live. And also please remember these are just stereotypes, meaning they're based on extremes and by and large not really that true, or at least that one-dimensional. Let's start things off with the jocks. It seems that jocks is a term applied to the sporty kids in school, those on the sports team. However, it seems that as well as being good at sports, to be classed as a jock you also have to be popular, and some even see jocks as being bullies, or at least abuse their popularity. Also, the stereotype tends to point towards jocks not being the brightest of bulbs, and sports being their only real talent. The name jock for these guys derives from an item of clothing many sportsmen wear, a jock strap, an undergarment used to protect the male private area, shall we say. The jock strap is called this because it's a strap for your jock, with jock being an old slang word for a thing. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on here. From the name jock and the fact it derives from something only men have, does that mean you can't have female jocks? Well, I think the stereotype leans towards only boys being able to be jocks. However, you do of course get the female athletic students, and I guess stereotypically the female version of a jock is a cheerleader, and you don't need me to explain that one. They lead the cheering. However, there is the classic idea of the popular girls in high school, the classically girly girls into fashion, makeup and genuinely focus on how they look. I think for the longest time this group didn't really have a name other than the popular girls. However, this changed with the release of the 2004 movie Mean Girls, which threw a spotlight on this stereotype, and it seems that calling this group of students mean girls has become something of a norm. Popular comes from the Latin populus, meaning people, while mean seems to be a much older word with much more unknown origins. I read that preps are seen as a subgroup of the popular kids. I guess they are the kids who are popular but not sporty. Well, maybe into different sports like golf and tennis, as opposed to American football. Preps are seen as being the teens from wealthy families and seem to segregate themselves from the rest of the students. They're perhaps best known for their fashion sense, things like light coloured polo shirts, chinos and jumpers tied around the neck. Prep has even become something of an adjective too, with preppy. The name of prep of course relates to money and wealth and prestige. It's often seen that wealthy people send their children to private schools you have to pay for, and a name for these private schools is a preparatory school, which was shortened to prep school, and the students in prep schools became known as preps. The word preparatory is defined as something that prepares or serves to prepare for something, and this word comes from the Latin preparatus, which relates to the words of prepare and preparation, as I guess the preps sent to prep school are being prepped for their lives as preps. A somewhat more recent group seems to be the hipsters. Hipsters are the kinds of people in big glasses with checkered clothes, into indie music, and male hipsters often sport mustaches or beards, and of course have a love for all things vintage. These people are seen as being well hip, and the stir suffix is often seen to group people together or to define someone by a single factor, take gangster and trickster. So while the word may seem to come from a combination of hip and stir, there's actually a deeper history to it than that. I said that hipsters seem like a somewhat recent creation, really coming into prominence in their modern form in the late 2000s/early 2010s. How the name first appeared in the late 1930s. It was mixed up with hipsters and was used in the New York jazz scene. It was mixed up with the term hipster, as at this time hip and hep both meant the same thing, coming from African American language meaning in the know. These 1930s hipsters would have been fans of jazz music and would have known the latest trends in that music scene, and when the new age of hipsters came, this name was applied to them. However, hipsters wasn't a name first applied to fans of jazz, but appeared early in the 30s, referring to dancers who moved their hips around a lot. And of course, hipsters are too a name for a certain cut of underwear. A stereotype that is pretty well known but not actually that common these days are the greasers, perhaps most well known because of the film Grease. Greasers are the teens who show a love for cars, motorbikes and mechanics full stop, often seen in leather jackets, white t-shirts, jeans and sunglasses. It's a classic look, and I'd say while the mechanic aspect of the stereotype has somewhat disappeared, the look certainly hasn't, and may have even somewhat merged with the hipsters. Greases of course relates to grease, the substance used in mechanics, which has no relation to the nation. However, greaser at first was something of a derogatory term in the USA in the 19th century for low-paid workers of Mexican and Italian descent, especially those low-paid workers who worked as mechanics. It wouldn't be till the 50s/60s in the USA when the term would be applied to youth into cars. However, while these teens still use grease in their cars, they also use a lot of grease somewhere else, in their hair in the classic slicked back style. It was because of the grease in their hair and the grease in their cars as to why they became known as greasers. The theatre kid stereotype is pretty easily explained within their name. They're the kids who take drama and are into theatre. However, they are also known by another name too, thespians. The name of thespian goes all the way back to ancient Greece, derived from the name of someone in particular, Thespis. Thespis is accredited with doing something first. He's cited as the first ever actor, as in the first person to ever take to a stage and pretend to be someone else entirely. It's from this very first actor that all kids who are into acting take their name from. A lot of these stereotypes are linked to the musical genre enjoyed by those in the group, so their name just relate to the name of the genre. So I'm going to list a bunch of them here. Rockers are named after rock music, metalheads named after metal, punks named after punk, and emos named after emo music. Well, that's how these groups got their names. How did these genres of music get their name? Well, I won't go into detail on that here, as I'd love to make a whole video about the names of music genres, so let me know if you would like to see that. However, there is one I'll go into detail here, as it's a word that has been applied to so many things and has a really deep history unto itself. Goth. Goth and its adjective form of Gothic have been applied to so many things, from Goth music to Gothic literature to Gothic architecture. However, it all began with a Germanic tribe from hundreds of years ago who were called the Goths. How the name Goth went from being the name of Germanic warriors to teenagers obsessed with black and all things spooky is a really interesting story unto itself. It begins with the ancient Roman Empire and how it kept on expanding. How the large Roman Empire shared its borders with Germanic tribes in the north, and one of those Germanic tribes were the Goths, who were actually two subgroups of the Visigoths and Ostrogoths. These Gothic tribes played a large role in the divide and eventual downfall of the Roman Empire. The end of the Roman Empire is seen as the end of the classical period of history and the start of the Dark Ages. This meant that Rome's influence and artistic style disappeared, and a new style from the Gothic people emerged. A darker, minimal and sharper design centered very much around religion started to appear in art and architecture. This can be seen clearly with churches and cathedrals from this time. And the style stayed like this into the Italian Renaissance of the 14th century, when people of that time found a new admiration for the style of ancient Rome and Greece. It was here that the style that had been used all this time started to seem unpleasant to them. It was in 1550 that this style of architecture was branded as Gothic. However, this wasn't a term of endearment to the style, but was intended to be negative and say how unpleasant the style of the Goths were, as they were now seen as the bad guys for ending the Roman Empire. It wouldn't be until the 18th century during the Enlightenment that writers would start to romanticize the old ways of the Goths, and Gothic literature was born, with Gothic literature focusing on the dark and supernatural aspects that the Gothic tribe was so interested in. And from Gothic literature we got Gothic movies, Gothic music, and Goths as we know them today. And that's how the Goth tribe and Goth kids ended up sharing a name. But that's a seriously abridged retelling of the story. It could be a video unto itself. Though why were that initial tribe called Goths? Well, we don't seem to know for sure, other than that it's sounding similar to the Old Norse Gothar, simply meaning men. And finally we have two names that kind of relate to the same group, the names of nerd and geek. Is there a difference between nerd and geeks? Well, that seems to be up for debate. Personally, I see nerds as being the kinds of people who are really into specific popular culture, e.g. video games and fantasy, but don't need to be extremely clever, and geeks those who are very intelligent. Basically, Roy's a nerd and Moz is a geek, but that's just my own idea. Nerd and geek started out as derogatory terms for these kinds of people, used to bully them, but over time geek and nerd have become way more popular, and many elements of what was seen as being nerdy like superheroes and playing video games have become some of the most popular things in the world. It could be argued that nerds help shape the modern world. Zidnaf has a really good video all about how the word has changed meaning over time. But where did these words come from? Let's start with nerd. There are so many ideas as to where the nerd may have come from, and these range from all kinds of places. One idea is that comes from the early 20th century word nerds, meaning things that were extraordinary, e.g. that idea is nerds, or that it may come from the old college term knerd, as students who wanted to study instead of drink was seen as a backwards idea to those who did drink. Then there's an idea that it comes from a ventriloquist dummy character from the 30s called Mortimer Snerd, who had some nerdy qualities to him. However, the most popular idea on the original nerd comes from one of the most famous children authors ever, Dr. Seuss. In his book If I Ran the Zoo, the main character lists off a series of fictional characters, one of those being a nerd. It's thought by many that Dr. Seuss coined this word out of pure gibberish, and from this book the name was given to bespectacled, tech-loving people across the globe. Geek, on the other hand, has a much more bizarre origin. Geek was originally a name given to a carnival worker, specifically the person in the show who would entertain the crowd by biting the heads off chickens. Of course, this person was seen as something of a weirdo, hence why this name was applied to modern geeks, who too were seen as weirdos, but not so much anymore. If there's anything I learned from doing this, it's how these terms have really shifted since their creation. While nerd and goth were seen as derogatory to start with, today people who identify with these titles call themselves it with pride. And today the term jock is super negative, being linked to being mean and dumb, despite supposedly being a name for the popular kids. As I said, high school can be hard enough as is. Maybe we should just put aside these silly names. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Name Explain depends on small monthly donations from fans like you to help keep the channel running. Just a small amount of $2 a month helps in a huge way, grants you patron exclusive Name Explain extras, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you. Hello everyone, thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Stick around and check out another video and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Name Explain. You can follow myself on Twitter at NameExplainYT. Follow me there and tweet the name Ferris at me so it came from this message. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.